morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this Ask Alumni Live career conversation as part of the Alumni Career Compass program from the University of Melbourne. The Career Compass program aims to demonstrate some of the benefits of the university's alumni community by giving recent graduates access to alumni who will share insights and advice based on their career journeys. My name's Carl Brown, and I'm one of the Alumni Relations Managers here at the university, and it's my great pleasure to be joined online today by alumna Madeleine Grummet. Madeleine completed a Master of Entrepreneurship at the University of Melbourne at the Wade Institute in 2016, and she's had an incredibly rich and varied career. She has experience as a journalist, innovator, investor, business mentor, speaker, board director, design thinker, creative consultant, and editor. She's also a serial entrepreneur, founding companies including Ilochi, Doremi Creative, girledworld, and her latest endeavor, the education technology platform Future Amp. However, what I've described barely even scratches the surface, and there's a lot more to learn from her this evening. Thanks for joining us today, Madeleine.
You're very welcome. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to sharing my story, but also chatting to some of the people online about some of their questions.
Fantastic. Well, I guess to start off with, I wonder if you can maybe just give us a brief description of your career journey. How did you end up where you've ended up right now?
Sure. I think by your description early on, it's clear I've had a pretty varied career, and I describe my career today as a portfolio career, which is what we know a lot of people are going to transition out of study into the future. My career started actually with an arts degree way back, and I did arts and then transitioned into law. I promptly pulled myself out of law and decided I wanted to be a journalist. My curiosity getting the better of me, and so I did a journalism cadetship with the Herald Sun here in Melbourne. And I actually stayed in journalism for around about a decade, inside newspapers, magazines, and down at Channel 9 for a while back in the day. So many stories to tell about surviving the 40 years of journalism. From there, I moved into media and strategic communications. So I actually started my own agency. It was the time when I was actually having my kids as well, and I wanted to find a way for work to work for me. And so for me, that meant freelancing and offering more strategic communication. So I ran my own agency for around about 7 years called Doremi Creative. At the end of which time I decided I wanted to understand how to do business at scale. And so from there, I came back to study, got the skills I needed, and since then have gone on to I've continued with media work, but I've moved well and truly into the startup ecosystem and now work across, as you said, innovation, education, and entrepreneurship.
Fantastic. And I guess one of the burning questions is, where did your entrepreneurial career actually kick off? What made that start?
Good question, actually. I was having a think about it before we chatted today. My parents were both pharmacists, actually, and I would classify myself as very unsciency. But my grandfather was also a pharmacist, and he was one of the founding pharmacists of AMCO in Australia. So he had an entrepreneurial spirit. I suspect some of that ran through my DNA. Entrepreneurship is an interesting career. I don't know that one necessarily says I'm going to wake up today and be an entrepreneur. I think it's something that you can't shake off. I certainly know through my career, whenever I was working in media, I very quickly moved into roles where I was making more decisions or more managerial responsibilities. And that was because I'm a curious person, but I also, if I see a problem, I really want to solve it. And so I suspect that entrepreneurship for me has always been this sense of how can we do this thing better, or like a sniffer dog, sort of going after what is that thing that I need to understand. And most of the entrepreneurs that I know and people who work in startup, and they are some of the most brilliant minds that I've met, both here in the university and more broadly, are people who don't take no for an answer, who are obsessed with getting to the heart of the problem and will really work hard to go at a solution. So I suspect I probably have those attributes, and they've been there for a while.
Fantastic. And I guess a part of that kind of indicates that you've learnt about yourself along the way and what your skills and attributes are. What would be your advice to recent graduates, and what are the first steps that you think they should take in their particular careers?
In terms of going into entrepreneurship or startup, or more broadly?
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship. So I think there's a few myths that we need to kill around entrepreneurship. A lot of people think entrepreneurship is just this think it up, get rich quick scheme. You know, you have a big idea and you just flip it into a business and all good, let's retire and buy an island. And we have a few people like Richard Branson and Steve Jobs or Bill Gates who probably perpetuate this myth. In some respects, we don't see the very deep backstory that in fact entrepreneurship is about hard work and about resilience and about a lot of fail before you get a win. The statistics show us that about 9 out of 10 startups fail, and that actually at the beginning of a startup, you don't really know where you're going to end. And so there's a lot of uncertainty that sits around it. So I think for a recent graduate who is considering going into startup or entrepreneurship, start now. Start trying to really understand and use all of your powers of resourcing and research to understand if you have an idea or there's a really good problem that you think needs solving, go out and start to understand as much as you can about who are you trying to solve it for, how are you trying to solve it, and what might you need to build around you to operate within an ecosystem within which you can viably launch a crack at that business.
And what mistakes do you think that people should try and avoid in those early stages?
I think writing a big business plan, for example, or fixing on a particular business model at very early stage is not going to serve you well if you are looking to build a high growth venture. Because what we know about entrepreneurship is that startups iterate and they change and they pivot is a big startup word, and that early on, spending a lot of time inside the building, building a really detailed business plan is not where you need to be. So that's one tip is get out of the building and actually understand your customers. I think the next is to build a team, a net worth, if you like, around you. And so that you've actually got a bunch of mentors who are much smarter than you, and you surround yourself with those people so you can really draw on that knowledge. And certainly at Melbourne University, there's a really rich network of people who you can draw on. So I'd suggest building those networks very, very early so that you're really clear you're not alone. Because entrepreneurship can be lonely, and we know there's a lot of data and a lot of research around mental health of founders actually, and certainly here in Victoria, Startup Victoria are a really fantastic and active organisation in the ecosystem, and they're doing a lot of work around how do we better support founders through those very early difficult stages of business when they're still trying to get a product market fit, they're still trying to raise capital, they're running pretty skinny little teams, and so how do we start to support founders more so that they're going to have a better crack at getting those businesses out into the world.
And I mean, you've talked about building a network of mentors or supporters. What did you do in your earlier career to actually start to surround yourself by a network of people that you can rely on for advice and support? How did you build that up?
I think because I'm trained as a journalist and probably my personality that I am a bit of a sniffer dog anyway, I think I naturally do build people around me because, of course, in journalism, people are your greatest resource. I really enjoy meeting new people and hearing their stories, and you can always learn something from everybody. And so I think that's a good thing to keep in mind as a recent graduate or even when you are studying, is to think everybody you meet has something to teach you, and you never know when that person might be relevant to you. And I think I've seen people burn bridges too quickly or move on from a job or a business or a person. And what I know is that, that power of that network and that knowledge bank is really, really important. And so there are several ways to do that. One of them is you go to lots of events and you engage. Another is you attend webinars like this and you put yourself out there and say, for that short investment of time, actually I might get access to a piece of knowledge or a person or an opportunity I would not have otherwise had. Another way to do it, of course, is through LinkedIn. And everybody should have a profile on LinkedIn. It doesn't matter whether you've had one job or 10 jobs or no jobs. Everybody should be on LinkedIn, and everybody should be utilising that digital community and village that is out there. That's a really great way to build a tribe of people around you.
And maybe we can talk a little bit about your EdTech startups, because there is some definite interest in that from our audience. Could you maybe just give us an overview of the projects that you've initiated and how they actually make an impact in the world?
Sure. So there's two education companies that I have launched so far. One of them is girledworld. We launched that out of the Master of Entrepreneurship in 2016, and we've since gone on to engage with about 30,000 students in about 180 schools around Australia, and have multiple industry partners and also work with the university sector. What we're trying to do inside that business, the problem we started with is looking at the future of work broadly. What is the meta problem where we see in Australia, for example, that our economy is not transitioning fast enough. When we're sort of on a global index, we need to do more to innovate and create the engines of our new economy. And what's the education sector doing to equip that next gen with the skills to be able to build and grow and drive those new businesses? So we were looking at that in our master's thesis, and girledworld really became the solution to that as an intervention to say, if we can get into the pipeline early at the secondary school sector age and start to work with students to give them the skill sets and the entrepreneurial mindsets and the access to technology that they need, then we can start to equip them better for that future workforce. So we work delivering workshops, events, and then we do lots of research projects with governments and with universities to try and understand how we better bridge education to industry. The second business we've launched quite recently is called Future Amp. It's a full platform play. It's an education technology platform. What we're hoping to do is really solve the problem that is career education at the moment is really struggling to give students access to windows to work. So we know even when you're at university, it's really difficult in a crowded marketplace where we know that traditionally safe jobs are gone, that mostly university students today will transition into a future of work where they will expect to have about 17 jobs across 5 different industries. And so how are they going to keep up with that skill need that's out there in the market and understand what pathways are going to be viable for them? So Future Amp is providing a full platform that really bridges that real world knowledge and skills gap that we see for students today. We've recently, delighted to announce, have recently secured seed funding, and we've also secured funding through the University of Melbourne's Chancellery as part of the Innovate Ed program, and that was an EdTech seed funding initiative for platforms that were solving a particular problem for the university. So we'll be working very deeply with Melbourne University over the coming months to test, do some user testing and really check that we've got a good product market fit around that solution. We hope to go live with that here and across APAC in the middle of next year.
Fantastic. Sounds like a really great set of initiatives that you're spearheading there, and we're delighted that the university is able to play a role in some of that as well. We've had a question through from one of our audience asking what characteristics are the most important for an entrepreneur, specifically in the edutech field. What would be your advice there?
I think specifically in EdTech is really understanding what's happening inside the system, but make sure you keep your mindset outside of that in terms of solving. And that's not to cast any dispersion on the current construct of education, but we know even in a university environment, there's a lot of calcification curriculum. We know there's very long lead times in terms of getting new curriculum to market. And so what we've tried to do in terms of working toward an innovative solution for the education sector is to really understand the problem, but come at it with a solution that hasn't been introduced before. So try and keep your thinking bigger than just working inside the system. I think entrepreneurs need a few things, and this is true across all entrepreneurs. You need confidence that you can do this thing and stick at it and get up every day and keep working to find a good fit for the problem. You need competence, and I don't mean just competence that you sign off for and then walk away with it. You need to keep learning and pushing yourself to understanding more and more and building new skills all the time. Curiosity. So to keep driving you forward for that next step you need to make in your business. And you probably need a healthy dose of courage as well. To go out and start something new for anybody can seem scary. And I think, the actual definition of a startup is to build a business under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And so for an entrepreneur, it's really understanding that you must hold your vision or your North Star for what is that big picture solution you're trying to deliver. And even if you don't know quite how you're going to get there, it's having that confidence that you're going to keep working at it and build and learn along the way.
Absolutely. Good advice.
And actually, I might build one more thing on that that entrepreneurs, I think one of the skills to have for entrepreneurs, but indeed anybody going into business, is really understand your strengths and weaknesses so that you've got a good level of self-agency, but also self-recognition so that you really understand where your deficits are. Can you fill them by doing more study or learning more or gaining new skills? Or are there certain areas that you can go, I actually have a bit of a hole in here, and I'm happy to have that plugged by a new team member or to pass off that work to someone else. So really being very honest with yourself around what are your awesome, spotlight strengths, and then what are some of those areas that you're going to need some help with.
Sure, fantastic. And a question kind of connecting to that, obviously you've had a very diverse career and you've applied your skills in many different ways. What would be your advice to alumni who are trying to identify their skills and maybe looking at ways in which they can apply them, not necessarily in the discipline that they maybe studied in at university? How do you go about kind of pivoting yourself into a slightly different line of work than you might traditionally assume based on your study?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think, again, finding your why, like finding out what is it that lights you up. If you think about, even if you're still studying at uni, what are those subjects that you're doing, or when were those moments when you were working on a project that you really felt engaged and you were being driven despite yourself? I think that's a really great place to start with identifying, okay, something lit up in me there, and then get curious about that thing, go deeper on it and say, maybe I can take that great strength and that great light out into the workforce and into an industry where I know I can grow that and use that. So that's really important. And especially as you go out into a changing workscape where you're not going to have one job for life, and you're going to need to really care a lot about the jobs you do go in and out of, but transfer your skills and yourself across a number of sectors in a more fluid gig economy. So I think it's really important to work out what is the work you love doing, so that getting up to go to that work is not a chore for you. Again, lifelong learning. We know this is one of the critical things for the future of work, is make sure you don't just get your ticket to ride and think that you can catch that train to the end of your working life. That's not how it's going to work. And really committing to saying, I will continue to educate, self-educate or formally educate, or do micro-credentials online. Those are things that you can do to really position yourself. We know that if we look at the hiring market, that's what employers are looking for. They're not interested in just a pure academic transcript. They want to see that you've demonstrated employability skills, that you are teachable, that you are willing to learn, that you have this really powerful set of EQ or emotional suite of skills across enterprise, and that you can apply those. So I think really keeping yourself open to the fact that you are evolving all the time is a really important thing to do, and stretch to your edges. We hear about get out of your comfort zone a lot, and it's a cliche. Really stretch. You don't know what you are capable of unless you are pushed to the edge. And I think, without pushing yourself into the red zone, we know that high productivity and people who feel most satisfied at work are those who are pushing into areas that they didn't realise they were capable of.
Sure, absolutely. And you talked about kind of continuing education throughout your career. You returned quite recently here to study the Master of Entrepreneurship. Was that something that you did with a specific goal in mind? Or what was your driver to actually come back and...
Yeah, it's actually, I was reflecting on this. So I was initially all keyed up to do an MBA, thinking I'll go and get some bones of business. And when I started exploring that, the Master of Entrepreneurship was only first offered in 2016. So toward the end of or middle of 2015, I was interested in an MBA. And then when I was doing my research, this Master of Entrepreneurship came across my orbit, and I chose that because it was pretty much like an MBA with a whole lot of innovation methodologies smashed into it. So, design thinking and lean startup and customer development and all those sciences and models that sit behind high growth startups. And I was really fascinated. I could see they were disrupting traditional industry, and everyone could see the shift that was occurring in the market. So for me, the reason I went back is I was really very passionately wanted to understand what that looked like. And I did have an intent to try and build a business that could scale and deliver a solution broader than the small business that I'd had. So my consultancy I'd been working on prior, you could classify as a small business. I had maybe 30 casual staff, but we really had no intent to scale. So the Master of Entrepreneurship is delivered through the Wade Institute of Entrepreneurship, just next to Alumni College here on campus. It's part of the Melbourne Business School, and its custodian is the Faculty of Business and Economics. It was a 1-year intensive, hands-on, head-on masters. It was 5 days a week on site, and you had to build businesses while you were here. So really intensive, and for me, actually the springboard that has allowed me to go on and build businesses I'm working on now. For those, I suppose, who are willing to do the work to get hands-on in their business while they're studying. So yes, there's a lot of theory, but you very quickly flip that into practice. And the other fabulous thing for me about the Master of Entrepreneurship is that we got access to the most amazing ecosystem of entrepreneurs, of innovators, of people from across the world, and then people from the university itself. And we're very, very lucky here that Melbourne has a thriving entrepreneurial community, and that's even grown, even in the 3 years I've been, out of the Masters. It is exponential, the growth that we've seen, and we've seen the government commit a lot to entrepreneurship. We see the Melbourne Entrepreneurial Centre being built next to us as part of Melbourne Connect, and Melbourne really asserting itself as a powerful place to start and grow a startup that could scale to the world.
Would you give us a bit of an insight into what that entrepreneurial community here in Melbourne and in Australia more broadly actually looks like? I mean, if someone is looking to connect with people who are really in the heart of that at the moment, what would be your advice to them?
I think if you're in Victoria or in Melbourne, a really great resource and the first place to go would be to Start Up Victoria. They push out a really fab newsletter, which is a bit of a scan and roundup of everything that's happening. There are meetups, there are pitch nights, there are events every single night of the week. You can access a lot online around what's happening across startup in Victoria through that. Podcast. I am obsessed with podcasts. I'm always plugged into a podcast. There's some fantastic podcasts that you can tap into that talk to the reality of entrepreneurship. One of my favourites is by a guy called Guy Raz, and it's called How I Built This. And he interviews founders of Dropbox, of Airbnb, of some of the big boom companies about what was that first little sniff or genesis of an idea before they built their billion-dollar unicorn. So podcasts are a great resource. Another one I've been listening to actually recently is called Without Fail by a fabulous pod host called Alex Bloomberg of Gimlet Media, who were famously launched Startup podcast. And that's looking at the flip side of entrepreneurship, where we know that you have to fall and fail a number of times before you get that elusive success. And so he interviews people who have had spectacular failures and risen like Phoenix from the ashes of that to build an even more successful company. So I think there's plenty of resources out there. A quick Google of startup will give you abundant resources to start to know and understand what is a startup, what is entrepreneurship, where are the opportunities. And yeah, I'm very happy also, if anyone wants to reach out to me, I'm happy to connect them with people or resources that I use a lot in terms of my own day-to-day dealings in the ecosystem.
That's wonderful of you to offer that. Thank you. You've touched on kind of failure in startups, and I wonder, maybe you can tell us what your approach is to dealing with uncertainty and the risks involved in the startup industry.
I think you've got to have a risk appetite anyway to go in. If you want a safe job and a safe day-to-day that's predictable, you don't go into startup in the first place. You have to have a philosophical relationship with failure, I think. There's a saying, fail fast, in entrepreneurship. And failure, if you classify it that, is a chance to learn. So that didn't work. Okay, well, what else will we try? And we know that the lean startup movement that Eric Ries so famously launched and built, that really is modelled on that ethos. And it's not about fail, it's about build it and then put it in your hands of the customers and learn, and then measure what you need to do next, and then build it again and keep iterating. And so the whole idea of startup is really predicated on this idea that it's evolving, and that if something's not working, you'll very quickly adjust what you're doing and iterate to come up with a new solution. So I think being willing to learn, being willing to take feedback, being willing to obsessively listen to your customers and obsessively focus on the problem you're solving for them, their pain points, their needs, is a way you will keep yourself really close to that problem and then get a better solution fit. And so if you fail, it's just you've disproved one more thing that gets you closer to the thing that you will prove.
And one question that kind of, I guess, follows on from that is, how do you decide when you stick with what you're doing at the moment and when you should take the risk and actually make a move into a different area? And that may be specifically within entrepreneurial activities, but maybe even more broadly. I mean, if you're looking at moving from one particular role to another, what's your approach to that decision-making process?
I think it's different for everybody, but trust your gut. I think our gut's a very powerful indicator of if something's not right, it's probably not. If something smells, it probably does. I'm a very much a person who rolls like that. It's not to say you can't use your rational brain, although I do think it was Einstein who said that every great discovery he ever made, his rational brain wasn't part of it. Because if you only use your rational brain, you'll cut yourself off from that very powerful source that is your gut and your instinct and your creativity. So if the red flags are coming up, that you're not in the right place, the right job, the right moment, then probably you need to take heed of that and then take action around it and work out what is it that's coming up for you, and maybe seek some advice around, from mentors or trusted people around what might some other pathways or options be for you. I've always been someone that has gone with my gut, and I've moved and transitioned in my career where it's felt right, and I think my curiosity has led me. But if you're a person who's a bit more conservative and risk averse, then it's wise to seek counsel at those moments of switch where you are thinking of a transition, to just check your thinking against someone else.
Sure. And maybe one more question before we move into some of the questions that we've had from our attendees, either in advance or live this evening. What do you look for in people that you hire?
Madness. What do I look for? Curiosity, I think. Curiosity, have they got an energy? Have they got a passion? Are they going to be easy to work with? And when I say easy, I don't mean a pushover. I mean, are they going to be someone who can, in our case, we need people who work fast, who have a good sense of humour, who can move quickly, who can multitask. That's what we look for. The specific needs of our business right now require people like that, and also people who have a high level of autonomy and self-agency, who we can say, please, can you go and do this piece of work? It will be delivered, and then we can quickly move to the next thing. So that's what we look for. But I think most people are looking for, startups have particular requirements, of course, depending on the age, the growth stage. But most people are looking to be the human in you. What do you really like when you walk out the door from work? Are you bringing your whole self to work, or are you parking part of that? And so I look for that authenticity, again, another overused word, but am I getting that real person? And therefore, am I tapping the abundant resource that is that 100% person, or am I just getting a persona at work? So that's really important to me, that someone's showing up real and working open.
Fantastic advice. Thank you. So we've had quite a few questions, so I will go into them in no particular order, but one of our attendees has asked, why the field of EdTech for both of your startups? What was the decision there, or what spurned that?
I think I didn't sort of go in thinking I would launch an education business, but when I think about it, probably I've always worked with knowledge of some sort, even with my background in media and journalism, and cascading knowledge and, sharing knowledge. So probably it just naturally came from that. But what we do know is Australia, one of our biggest exports, service exports, is education. And we also know there's a lot of work to do in our education sector to equip the next generation with the skills they need to drive our future economy. And so during my master's, as I said earlier, I recognised that was a really key opportunity, and that there needed to be a lot more players in that area. And as we've gone deeper through girledworld in understanding the problem and the opportunities there, then Future App was really that natural extension of that, and both of them play in the education space, albeit with very different business models.
Here's a bit of a pie in the sky one. If money was no option, what technology would you like to see every child or classroom or teacher have at their disposal?
I think something really basic like rockstar Wi-Fi. Like, even when we look at the huge digital divide we know still exists in Australia, let alone in other parts of the world, we know there's still a really big gap between those who have access to knowledge and those who don't. So I would like to see that, students in every classroom have access to the knowledge that they need and their right to get those windows to the world, and to really expand their frame of reference, and really to democratise that access, because, at the moment we're in the knowledge age, but not everybody can get it. And so I'd really love to see students in every classroom being able to just bring the world to them and really expand those walls of the classroom.
Sure. Okay. Someone else has asked how we best inspire the next generation and teach them soft skills to navigate the future of work. What would be your advice to the upcoming generation?
It's a great question. I think a lot of the work that we do with students, in fact, last week we were in New South Wales and Canberra working with lots of students around the future of work. I think they need to understand implicitly and personally what, for them, does it mean to build those skills, and how is it relevant? Because for a lot of students, they're really siloed away from their future pathway. They haven't really thought about what they want to do beyond school, how they will contribute meaningfully to society. So this sort of notion of future of work for a lot of students they're quite latent actually in their understanding of what that bridging looks like. So I think what we try and do is get them very hands-on. So one of the methodologies I've trained deeply in with IDEO is design thinking and ethnographic, putting yourself at the centre of a user experience and then designing a solution for them. And so through girledworld, we work with a lot of industries. So we've had Microsoft, Virgin Australia, Atlassian. We ask them to give us an industry problem. We give it to the students, and then they can get hands-on with building the solution and building skills and working in teams, communicating, using design thinking, so that they're really getting that practical skill build going on. And then it ignites their curiosity, then it activates them, and then they're getting actionable skills that they can then transfer and transition into their own school learning at a project-based level, or indeed into the workforce. It's a great question.
And how do you feel that technology is actually disrupting or transforming the education sector, especially in high school education?
Oh, I think it's been revolutionary when we've seen, digital technology come into the classroom. We've seen digital technology enable sort of self-paced learning for the first time, where, you're not delivering mass education across a cohort. You can really differentiate across that continuum of learning. We've seen, virtual lessons, so virtual world in, so that students can get that real world learning that's so fundamental to them understanding how they behave in the world and what the world looks like. Flipped classrooms, even think about basic research. I mean, university students 20 years ago even, were going to the library to get books. So think about the exponential scale of research now and the knowledge that students can get access to through digital technology. It's interactive. So interactive learning is powerful. Social learning, we know, that's an incredibly powerful way for students to observe and learn and develop new behaviours through really expanding their frame of reference. And much of our research in girl world has really looked at that power of mentorship and frame of reference in terms of expanding a student's worldview. And we know that would not really have been, or wouldn't be possible without that scale that technology has enabled those students. So, you can't compare the education system today to the education system even of 20 years ago. The other things we see coming into education, which is really exciting, are things like augmented reality and virtual reality, and those sorts of things are enabling students to have a very powerful, immersive experience of sitting inside someone else's shoes or being inside another culture, going back to times in history so they can better understand and place themselves in those moments. And, even for an adult, that's a powerful thing. So this is really changing what education looks like. And I think, a lot of the time when we think about education, what is the purpose of education? Why does it exist? And in the knowledge age, what are we equipping those students with when we think about education being successful? What do we need to give them so that we know they are, future-proof, if you like? And in the previous industrial age, we know that we were trying to create students who could do the factory work and, manual, repeatable tasks. But that's not what we're equipping this next generation for. We need them to be critical thinkers, to be innovators, to be problem solvers, to think big and solve these climate change and big global issues that we're seeing. And so we really need to educate for a very different suite of capabilities.
And you mentioned social learning. There was a question as well about how higher education maintains the quality of social learning and meets the diversity of needs in the context of online learning. Do you have any thoughts on how
I do
we move into an online space more?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's a lot of discourse at the moment, and for the educators who are listening to us at the moment, I think it's a tricky question. We know we're in a bit of transition at the moment around educational models and educational delivery, and that face-to-face delivery is very powerful. But of course, the traditional lecture theatre with one person pushing knowledge out is not what education is going to work best as a tool for the student into the future. And so we see digital technology and social learning coming in to try and sort of disrupt that model a little bit. I think social learning, so for those of you, it's a theory really around that you will learn new behaviours by observing and imitating others. And certainly FutureAmp, our platform, that's what we built that platform on. So think of it like a network, I suppose, a bit like LinkedIn. You're able to access knowledge and mentorship and other humans around you to build your body of knowledge. And I think for a university student, that's incredibly powerful, not just because it breaks down the isolation that can sometimes occur as a student, but it really, as the person who wrote the question said, it expands that frame of reference, encourages diversity and not just gender diversity or some binary representation, but neurodiversity. How do we start to think and step around this problem or this piece of knowledge and really check it with some different thoughts and some different inputs? So social learning, super powerful. And also when we think about teamwork and its criticality in the workforce now and into the future, and that's at enterprise level through to startup level through to right across business. You will not get away with transitioning out of university into the employment market without good team skills, good communication skills, the ability to work with others, even if they are very neurodiverse. And social learning is a really great way to build those early skills of teamwork. I hope that answers your question.
Sure does. We've got a couple more questions and then I might start to wrap up. Someone's asked, in your field, you would obviously require some teaching content, some educational content part of your process. What would be your recommended strategy for obtaining the content that you can't necessarily create yourself? Would you recommend paying content creators a flat fee, or would you actually hire them into your business? What would be your approach to that?
To build curriculum content?
Yeah, to the actual teaching content for the platforms and so forth.
So obviously inside curriculum there's a really particular dictate for the most part around what satisfies the curriculum framework. So I would certainly, if you're looking to deliver within the context of curriculum, to use experienced educators who know how to write to lesson plans, or if it's an inquiry unit or whichever area you're working in, get an expert to help you do that. I actually sit on a board for an education company called Cool Australia, that's COOL called Australia Education. They have abundant free resources for teachers around Australia on a platform. So if you look it up, coolaustralia.org, you'll see there are masses of lesson plans on there, all downloadable and free, which are all about real world learning, so about new skills, sustainability, culture, ethics, etc. So that's a really great spot that you could go to have a look. We use, in our case, so either expert educators to actually write the curriculum. I'm not a trained teacher, so we leave that to the experts. But we also use a lot of research from around the world and look at new education models. We recently did some training with an amazing group called Chaos Pilot, KAOS Pilot. They come out of Denmark. I'd encourage you to have a look at their work. You can jump on their website, and that's a new pedagogy for learner-centric design. So we use a lot of those models around creating some of the content that we produce. And we also use the Foundation for Young Australians for this market because they have done some deep research around future skills. They're now working a lot at a government level looking at some policy shift around how we do that and transform education. But if you go to FYA.org, Foundation for Young Australians, they will have lots and lots of resources, and they've got 4 fabulous white papers which talk specifically about the new world of work, and a lot of that taps into how we then push that back down and cascade that down into the secondary sector.
Fantastic. Great advice. Thank you. And one final audience question. How do you promote new technologies to schools and institutions where there's a hesitancy to change?
Again, another great question. I think you need to demonstrate that you've done some good evaluation and that you've demonstrated that the switching cost is not going to be, that pain of the switching cost is not going to be greater than the joy of taking it on. So we know that large institutions and certainly the education sector can take a while to take new things on. There's a lot of lagged infrastructure at the moment we see in the education sector across schools in Australia, and that adopting new technologies, there's a lot of issues around integration of new tech. And so one of the best ways I think is to work with them directly and really have that co-design like at that early stage, and certainly with FutureAmp we're doing this and have done a lot of deep customer insight work. We've got groups of teachers and students in to really make sure our user experience and our user interface design is where it needs to be for the people we're serving and the customers that we're delivering to, but also that our back end is going to be compatible with some of the systems that we're going to be working with. So that can be a challenge, especially across the secondary school sector in Australia, where we see such diversity and of tech that schools are using now. But our work with the University of Melbourne over the coming months is to also understand what FutureAmp would look like integrating with enterprise at this level to deliver a career education solution to students. So I think it's about getting out there and actually seeing if those things fit and working out how to create a technology that's slightly agnostic, if you like, so it's not so bespoke that it's going to be very difficult to make a case for a school to take it on or a university to take it on, and really do some of that de-risking work for them.
Fantastic. And one final question from me just before we wrap up. Can you give us a couple of your top tips for success?
I would say one of my favourite quotes is from, well, he wasn't a businessman, but he did run an empire, from Yoda. And he said, do or do not, there is no try. So what I mean by that is commit. One of my top tips for success is if you are going to do something, commit to it and do it. And at least for the time that you're engaged with that, really put your full capacity and focus and potential into delivering that thing so that you can walk away, whether it succeeded or failed, knowing that you actually gave it your all. I think stay curious. Of course, I think Steve Jobs or someone like that cliched that term, but do stay curious. For me, curiosity's been my absolute life fuel. And so keep learning and keep being curious and keep pushing till you do find that reason for being, that ikigai, as they say in Japanese, that thing that sort of lights you up and makes you make sense of yourself. So keep trying to find that thing, because everybody has got one. And even if you don't know what that is now, if you've, just started studying or you're midway, you've just graduated, everybody will find that thing that lights them up. And again, I'll say probably stretch to the edges. Don't sit within a shrinking zone. Really see what you are capable of and keep saying yes and keep trying new things and keep pushing to see where you can take yourself, because your career pathways will be long and no doubt you will have many jobs and many opportunities. And if you're sitting in a shrinking zone, there'll be far less of those in your future scapes.
But now it's time to kind of bring this to a close. Madeleine, it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. Thanks for sharing some of the insights from your career, and thank you for offering to be contactable for anyone who's interested to get in touch with you following this. On behalf of the university, thank you for being involved. We really appreciate it.
Such a pleasure. Thanks, Carl.
Thanks, everybody.